For the residents of Kamisoshigaya, a quiet district of Setagaya, the year 2000 marked the beginning of changes they never expected. From gentrification to Tokyo's unstoppable expansion, families on what was once a bustling street faced harsh new realities as the times changed. But on the night of December 30th, 2000, as the year came to an end, they would be confronted with a murder so brutal it would forever change the neighborhood and the nation. The Setagaya family, consisting of 4 members, father Mikio, 44, mother Yasuko, 41, daughter Nina, 8, and son Rei, 6, had once lived in a lively neighborhood filled with families. But as the century turned and Tokyo grew, many of their neighbors sold their properties and moved away from the constant noise and chaos of the expanding city. By December 2000, only 4 homes remained occupied in the area, including the Miyazawa home. From the outside, the Miyazawa house appeared to be one large structure, but it was essentially 2 attached homes. One half was occupied by the Miyazawa family, while the other housed members of Yasuko's family, primarily her mother, though her sister and brother-in-law would occasionally stay there as well. The Setagaya family was planning to move to a larger home and a more stable community, especially with the city purchasing their land to expand the nearby Soshigaya Park. But Yasuko chose to delay the move, concerned about how the transition would affect her children, especially their youngest, Rei, who was living with a developmental disorder. As a tutor herself, Yasuko understood the importance of a stable environment for education. She ran an after-school tutoring program, or cram school, from their home, and was dedicated to providing that same stability for her own family. To those who knew them, the Setagayas were a tight-knit, hard-working, and respected family. But everything changed on the night of December 30th, 2000. The day began like any other. Like many families preparing for New Year celebrations, the Setagayas spent the day shopping near Kito's Karasuyama station. After finishing their shopping, they returned home for a quiet evening, enjoying dinner and watching television before heading to bed. What happened in the hours that followed has baffled investigators for decades, and much of it remains speculation. But based on the evidence, this is what is believed to have occurred. Sometime after 11 p.m., a man approached the Miyazawa home through the adjacent Soshigaya Park, using the backyard fence, and possibly a tree with broken branches. Intruder climbed to a second-floor bathroom window. After removing the window screen, he entered the home. His first target was 6-year-old Rei, who was asleep alone in his bedroom near the entry point. The intruder strangled Rei to death, leaving his small body in bed, the only victim to be strangled rather than stabbed. Next, the killer turned his attention to Mikio Miyazawa, who was awake on the first floor, finishing work. The details here are unclear. Some sources say Mikio heard noises upstairs and rushed up, confronting the intruder. The attacker then pulled out a sashimi knife, a blade commonly used for slicing seafood, and repeatedly stabbed Mikio as he tried to resist. Other sources claimed the killer went downstairs to attack Mikio, who attempted to escape up the stairs, but collapsed back down, fatally wounded. What is known is that Mikio's slipper was found on the staircase, and his body was discovered at the bottom of the stairs, with multiple stab wounds. A fragment of the sashimi knife remained lodged in his skull. The killer's final victims were Yasuko and Nina, who had been asleep in the attic. Though details are scarce, it's widely believed they were attacked in their sleep, based on bloodstains on the futon. At some point, the killer switched weapons, discarding his now broken sashimi knife and retrieving a kitchen knife from the home. Yasuko and Nina attempted to escape down the attic's foldable ladder, but were ultimately killed. Their bodies were found huddled together on the second floor, near the top of the stairs. 8-year-old Nina had been beaten, as well as stabbed. Several of her teeth were missing. Forensic evidence confirmed Nina was the last to die. But what made this case infamous wasn't just the brutality, was what happened afterward. After murdering the family, the perpetrator stayed in the house for at least 2 hours. The sequence of his actions is debated, but his behavior earned this case the nickname the Goldilocks murder. The killer calmly walked past the victims' bodies, went to the kitchen, and helped himself to food from the fridge, including ice cream, barley tea, and, according to some reports, melon. Oddly, he didn't use a spoon instead. He squeezed the ice cream tubs to push the contents to the top, eating directly with his mouth and leaving saliva and fingerprints everywhere. While in the kitchen, the killer found the family's first aid kit and treated a hand wound he had sustained during the attack. He left behind the bloodied bandages, providing investigators with a DNA sample. Next, he rummaged through the family's documents in a first-floor storage room, carried them to the second-floor bathroom, and dumped them into the bathtub. Some point he also used the toilet but didn't flush, leaving more biological evidence behind. Some reports claim he then took a nap on the family's sofa, though this detail is disputed. What is known is that the killer removed his jacket, hat, shirt, scarf, gloves, and other items including 2 handkerchiefs and a fanny pack and left them behind, along with both murder weapons. At 1:18 a.m., the family's computer logs showed that the perpetrator turned on Mikio's computer and created a new folder. Some reports even claim he accessed the website of a local theater company. Later that morning, around 10 a.m., the computer was activated again. Initially, investigators believed this indicated the killer had stayed in the house for nearly 10 hours, but further investigation revealed the computer was likely triggered accidentally when the person who discovered the bodies entered the home. This suggests the killer stayed for at least 2 hours and likely left between 1:18 a.m. and dawn. Around 10:30 a.m., Yasuko's mother, Haruko, who lived next door, went to check on the family after her phone calls went unanswered. Upon entering the house, she found Mikio's body at the bottom of the stairs and immediately called the police. What investigators found was shocking. For brutally murdered bodies, and a mountain of evidence, with fingerprints, footprints, DNA, from blood, and even the killer's unflushed feces, many believed the case would be solved quickly. A former senior official later remarked, "The crime scene was a mountain of treasure. Everyone thought a solution wouldn't be far away." But in the years that followed, that optimism faded. As police from the Seiyo precinct and later the Tokyo Metropolitan Police combed through the evidence, their task was daunting. Running fingerprints, analyzing DNA, and tracing the origins of the discarded clothing was slow, tedious work. But eventually, the pieces started to paint a clearer picture of the killer. The clothing provided a surprisingly detailed image of what the perpetrator looked like and where he shopped. Police determined the killer wore a gray Crusher bucket hat, a white baseball shirt with purple sleeves, a cheap tagless plaid scarf, Fay Uniqlo AirTag jacket, black gloves, a gray and black fanny pack. Footprints found at the scene revealed he wore sneakers, size 27.5 centimeters. With this information, investigators created a composite of the killer's clothing. Attention then turned to the murder weapons and DNA evidence. The killer had left saliva, hair, blood, and feces throughout the house, critical biological evidence. But Japan's strict privacy laws complicated matters. In his podcast on the case, journalist Nicholas Obregon revealed that all DNA testing was conducted by an internal department, forbidden from releasing results without the individual's consent. Thus, much of what is publicly known about the DNA was leaked to the media. The leaked information suggested the killer was a male, between 15 and 35 years old, young and athletic enough to scale the home. He was likely 5 feet 6 inches or 5 feet 7, with a slender build based on the 32-inch waist of the fanny pack. His blood type was A, and his feces revealed his last meal included string beans and sesame seeds. Yet, when his fingerprints were run through Japan's criminal database, there were no matches indicating he had no prior criminal record. Despite circulating the composite and these details to the public, no one came forward with information. In a desperate attempt to jog memories, police even released a document highlighting TV programs and major events from the night of the murders. But while there was an abundance of physical evidence, most of it led nowhere. The clothing items were mass-produced and widely available. The fingerprints produced no matches. The case remained frozen until 2 particular items provided much-needed leads: the killer's shoes and fanny pack. Each would reveal crucial details that finally narrowed the scope of the investigation. Upon investigating the origin of the shoes, police discovered that the 27.5 centimeter Schlesinger sneakers, worn by the perpetrator, were never sold in Japan. They were only available in South Korea. This allowed investigators to narrow down the pool of suspects, concluding that the killer had, at some point, either lived in or visited South Korea. However, under South Korean law, all citizens over the age of 17, as well as all visitors to the country, are required to provide fingerprints upon arrival. These fingerprints are stored in a national database. With this in mind, Japanese authorities collaborated with the Korean government, running the fingerprints found at the crime scene against Korea's database. But once again, no matches were found, leaving investigators at yet another dead end. The second piece of crucial evidence came from the killer's hip bag, and, unlike the sneakers, this discovery expanded the scope of the investigation far beyond Japan, all the way to the United States. When police analyzed the contents of the bag, They found several interesting items. Grip tape commonly used by skateboarders, trace amounts of Draco Noir, a popular men's cologne, and perhaps most puzzling, small amounts of sand. Lab analysis revealed that the sand didn't originate from Japan at all, but from Los Angeles, California. This revelation completely upended police theories about the killer's background and forced them back to square one. As time passed and more tips flooded in, investigators uncovered new leads, each one more confusing than the last. Some discoveries appeared to shed light on the case, while others only muddied the waters. For example, early in the investigation, a taxi driver came forward claiming that on the night of the murders, he had picked up 3 men near the scene of the crime. These men matched the general age and build the killer was believed to have, and notably, one of them appeared to be injured, leaving a bloodstain on the taxi seat. Could these men have been involved? The biggest problem with this theory was that all the evidence from inside the Miyazawa home pointed to the likelihood of a single killer. There were other strange reports as well. The day after the murders, nurses at a medical center near Tobuniko Station, several hours north of Setagaya, recalled treating a man in his mid-30s with a severe hand injuries, so deep they could see the bone. Despite being asked repeatedly how he sustained the wound, the man refused to explain. The encounter left such an impression that the nurses reported it to the police. Another odd detail came from the 2 handkerchiefs found at the crime scene. One was intact, but the other had a hole cut through its center. Curious, police appealed to the public, asking if anyone could explain why a handkerchief might be modified this way. Responses revealed that fishermen commonly use a handkerchief like this to loop it over a knife handle, improving their grip when cutting large fish, such as tuna. Others suggested a more criminal motive, that the handkerchief was used to hold the knife without leaving fingerprints, while the second was used as a makeshift mask. But this raises a troubling question. If the killer was so cautious about leaving fingerprints on the knife, why did he leave fingerprints all over the house? Such contradictions baffled investigators for years, slowing progress and casting doubt on every theory. Despite the mountain of evidence, only a few plausible scenarios emerged. For a family like the Miyazawas, finding a motive seemed impossible. They were well-liked, respected, and had no known disputes that could escalate to murder. With no clear suspect, police were forced to explore every possible tip and motive, as is typical in such cases. One of the first theories was that this had been a burglary gone wrong. But too many details of the case didn't align with that idea. For one, burglars typically target homes during times when they know the occupants will be away. Yet the killer chose to strike the Miyazawa home in the evening, when the entire family was sure to be present. More unsettling, the perpetrator's first action after breaking in was not to search for valuables, but to murder 6-year-old Ray, an innocent child who posed no threat. If the killer's true goal had been theft, they would have gone straight for valuables, not taken the life of a sleeping child. Even after murdering the entire family, the killer showed little interest in valuables. Some reports say around 150,000 yen, roughly $1,500 was taken, but nearly $2,000 more was left untouched, further suggesting robbery was never the motive. Given the brutal nature of the crime and the killer's bizarre behavior afterward, the family's food, using their bathroom, patching up his wounds, many theorized this was the work of a serial killer or someone suffering from severe mental illness and homicidal tendencies. Support for this theory comes from the killer's complete lack of remorse. He roamed the house as if it were his own, even as the bodies of his victims lay around him. Moreover, it was the female victims who suffered the most severe violence. Yasuko's injuries indicated that she fought her attacker until the bitter end, sustaining extreme damage in the process. 8-year-old Nina, the last to die, suffered not only brutal stab wounds, but was also beaten after death, her missing teeth, and severe hemorrhaging evidence of this. Some believe the disproportionate brutality inflicted on the female family members points to the killer harboring deep hatred towards women, fueling the theory that he intentionally targeted them. Apart from the burglary and serial killer theories, the only other plausible motive was revenge or personal grudge. Yet even this theory presented complications. Friends and colleagues consistently described the Miyazawas as a kind, well-liked family. One acquaintance told police, "Mikio was a congenial man who got along well with everyone, definitely not the sort to make enemies, let alone the kind of enemies capable of murder." The only known dispute came days before the murders, when Mikio made a noise complaint to local skateboarders using the skate park behind the family home. This led to one of the most persistent early theories, that the skateboarders enraged by Mikio's complaint, retaliated by killing his entire family. Admittedly, this theory was far-fetched. Yet, it gained traction because it aligned with the taxi driver's account of picking up 3 young men near the scene, one with an injured hand, and because the killer's clothing and hip bag contained items associated with skaters, such as grip tape. However, after extensive interviews with the local skaters who frequented Soshigaya Park around the time of the murders, police uncovered nothing suspicious. Furthermore, many struggled to believe a petty noise complaint could escalate into the cold-blooded slaughter of 4 people, including 2 children. In contrast, the most enduring, and perhaps most bizarre theory, stemmed from the seemingly insignificant sand found in the killer's hipbag. Lab tests revealed the sand originated from California, specifically an area just north of Los Angeles. But how did sand from California end up in a house in Setagaya, Japan? For many, the answer lay in the killer's DNA. Early in the investigation, police analyzed the DNA left behind at the scene and created a composite of the killer's ancestry. The results showed that the killer was of mixed ethnicity: a mother, likely from Southern Europe, and a father of East Asian descent. The paternal DNA markers couldn't pinpoint the killer's nationality, but indicated markers commonly found among 1 in 13 Japanese people, 1 in 10 Chinese people, and 1 in 4 Koreans. These 2 puzzle pieces, the California sand and the mixed ancestry, fueled one of the public's most popular theories, that the killer had a military background. The key clue: the sand. Further analysis revealed that the sand came from the Mojave Desert region, specifically from around Edwards Air Force Base in California. Theorists believe the killer may have been serving in the U.S. military and stationed at this base, where he unknowingly picked up the sand that later contaminated his hip bag. Following this line of reasoning, it's speculated that the killer was later stationed in Japan, likely at Yokota Air Base, located roughly an hour from the Miyazawa home. But for this theory to make sense, the killer needed to understand Japanese, and, according to evidence at the scene, he did. The killer appeared to have carefully selected which documents to destroy, suggesting he could read Japanese. Alternatively, he may have randomly dumped documents into the bathtub. But the theory of his fluency remains popular. This is where the mixed-race ancestry comes in. Many believe the killer was the child of a U.S. serviceman who married a foreign woman, possibly Japanese, during deployment. The killer may not have lived permanently in Japan, but likely visited frequently enough to be familiar with the language, the area, and how to navigate unnoticed. This theory ticks several boxes. First, the killer's military background would explain his strength and agility, the physicality required to scale a fence, climb to a second-story window, and carry out such a violent attack. Second, being part foreigner could explain why the Japanese government had no record of him. Meanwhile, his Japanese heritage would have provided him with enough language skills and cultural familiarity to confidently remain in the house for hours after the murder, knowing how to leave undetected. Because this theory neatly ties together several key pieces of evidence, it has become a favorite among the public, the media, and countless online forums. But it wasn't the only theory to emerge from the military connection and DNA evidence. Years later, a journalist writing under the pen name Fumiya Ichihashi would publish a book proposing a new, even darker possibility. Author Fumiya Ichihashi proposed one of the most controversial theories surrounding the Setagaya murders: that the killer was a former member of the South Korean military-turned-contract killer, hired by the company responsible for redeveloping the Miyazawa's neighborhood. Ichihashi argues that DNA analysis offers compelling evidence supporting this claim, as the genetic markers found were far more common among Korean individuals than Japanese citizens. As a trained soldier, the killer would have possessed both the strength and skill needed to carry out such a brutal attack. But beyond the physical capability, this theory provided something that many others lacked: a clear motive. Although the Miyazawa family had already sold their land to the city for park expansion, they kept delaying their move, citing concerns about how the transition would affect their children. As time passed, they became one of the last families remaining in the neighborhood, possibly frustrating the developers. Ichihashi suggests that, to speed up the redevelopment process, the company hired a hitman to eliminate the family. This theory aligns with several pieces of evidence. The sand found in the killer's hip bag could be explained by military connections, as could the DNA markers more prevalent among Koreans. The Schlesinger sneakers, in the exact size the killer wore, were sold exclusively in South Korea, further fueling suspicions. But despite appearing plausible, this theory raises more questions than it answers. Why would a professional hitman stay in the house for hours after carrying out a murder? Why would they eat the family's food, use their bathroom, leave behind DNA, fingerprints, and even feces? Why was the violence so excessive, with victims beaten and stabbed repeatedly, even after death, making the murders seem personal rather than clinical? And perhaps the most significant hole in the theory lies in the fingerprints. As previously mentioned, Japanese authorities collaborated with South Korean officials to run the killer's prints through Korea's national database. Under South Korean law, all citizens and visitors must provide fingerprints. No matches were found. This suggests the killer had either never been to Korea, wasn't Korean, or had somehow managed to avoid biometrics requirements for years. And unlikely possibility. The most far-fetched theory came from investigative journalist Nicholas Obregon, discussed on his podcast Faceless. According to Obregon, the killer may not have been an adult at all but a child or teenager. As unbelievable as that may sound, a disturbing internet post has kept this theory alive for decades. The post appeared on 2chan, an anonymous Japanese text board later renamed 5chan, written by someone claiming to be a 13-year-old boy going by the name Mr. Koremitsu. The post emerged during a long thread in which users shared personal experiences with animal cruelty. In the chilling message, the boy wrote, "Now, when I see the happy family next door, I want to do something like that Oita family murder case. The closing date is December 31st at 11:59 p.m. I'm thinking about killing it off before the 21st century arrives." The Oita family murder case the poster referenced occurred just a few years earlier, involving the late-night knife attack of a family in their home, leaving 3 dead and 3 critically injured. Shockingly, the perpetrator in that case turned out to be a 15-year-old boy. The brutal crime made headlines across Japan, contributing to growing fears about violent crimes committed by minors. The 2chan post was made on December 27, 2000, just 2 days before the Setagaya murders. To this day, the poster's identity has never been confirmed, nor is it known whether the happy family next door referred to the museum. Like many anonymous internet posts, there's no way to determine if it was genuine or simply the dark fantasy of a troubled youth. Still, investigators could not ignore the possibility. If the killer had been a minor, it would explain the untraceable fingerprints, as juvenile prints are typically not stored in criminal databases. It would also support claims that the last meal the killer ate, string beans and sesame seeds, was more like a home-cooked meal, possibly prepared by his mother, implying he still lived at home. But this theory clashes with several other key pieces of evidence. How would a 13-year-old boy acquire sand from a U.S. military base in California? How could a child possess the strength to scale the house, subdue Mikio Miyazawa in a fight, and brutally murder 4 people, 2 of whom were adults? For these reasons, most experts familiar with the case dismiss the teenager theory altogether. Still, with no concrete suspects and little progress, police were forced to consider every possibility, no matter how improbable. In their desperation for answers, Tokyo police offered a record-breaking reward of 20 million yen, approximately $190,000, for any information leading to the killer's arrest. It remains the largest reward ever offered in Japanese criminal history. The investigation that followed became the most extensive in Japan's history, spanning over 2 decades. Today, the 92-year-old grandmother of the Miyazawa children, Setsuko, still waits for justice. She is often seen standing at the entrance of Kito's Karasuyama station in Setagaya, quietly handing out flyers, hoping that even after 24 years, someone, somewhere, knows something. Since the tragedy, a Tokyo Metropolitan Police officer has been stationed outside the Miyazawa home, 24/7. The path leading to the house has been permanently blocked off. In 2010, following intense public pressure, Japan abolished the statute of limitations for murder and other fatal crimes, meaning the killer can still be brought to justice, no matter how much time has passed. But after 24 years, 16,000 pieces of evidence, over 15,000 tips, and a staggering 250,000 investigators, the brutal murders of the Miyazawa family remain one of Japan's greatest unsolved mysteries.